Before boxed mixes and bakery displays, cakes were deeply personal. They weren't just desserts, they were memory keepers. A vintage cake recipe didn't live in a cookbook. It lived in a mother's hands, a grandmother's instincts, and a kitchen filled with familiar smells. These cakes marked moments that families still remember decades later. Vintage cakes were baked for reasons that mattered: birthdays, weddings, church gatherings, reunions, or simply because someone came home safely. Flour was sifted by hand, butter was softened patiently, and sugar was measured with care. Because ingredients weren't wasted, every step mattered. One of the most powerful things about these cakes is how instantly they bring memories back. The smell of a spice cake baking can transport someone straight into their childhood kitchen. A slice of pound cake can recall sitting at a worn wooden table, waiting for coffee to cool. These weren't flashy cakes, they were honest ones. Recipes like Depression-era chocolate cake, applesauce cake, molasses cake, and simple vanilla loaf were created during hard times. Families didn't have much, but they still baked. These cakes were symbols of hope and comfort. Even when money was tight, cake meant love. Grandmothers rarely wrote these recipes down. They baked by feel, knowing when the batter was right, just by how it moved in the bowl. Children learned by watching, standing on chairs, licking spoons, and being told, "Don't rush it." These vintage cakes survived because they mattered. They were passed down through generations. Not because they were perfect, but because they were familiar. Each family had its own version. A little more nutmeg, less sugar, a longer bake. That was the secret. In this series, we revisit 25 vintage cake recipes that bring back family memories, not just to list ingredients, but to honor the moments they were part of. These cakes remind us of kitchens that felt safe, voices we miss, and traditions worth remembering. Not every vintage cake was baked for a big celebration. Many of the most remembered cakes were everyday cakes, the kind made without an occasion, simply because the ingredients were there and the family was together. These cakes quietly built traditions that lasted a lifetime. Pound cake was one of the most common. Dense, buttery, and simple, it was often baked in a heavy pan and sliced slowly over several days. It sat on the counter wrapped in cloth, becoming part of daily life. A slice in the morning with coffee, another in the evening after dinner. It didn't need frosting to be special. Applesauce cake was another staple, especially when fresh apples or sugar were scarce. Spiced gently with cinnamon and cloves, it filled the house with warmth. Children often didn't even know it was a budget cake. They only knew how good it tasted and how safe it felt to eat it at home. Coffee cakes were baked for guests. Not fancy guests, family guests. An aunt stopping by, a neighbor visiting after church. These cakes were meant to be shared. Crumb toppings were stretched carefully. Nuts were added when available, and the cake was sliced generously. Because hospitality mattered more than appearance, these cakes weren't rushed. Even on busy days, baking slowed people down. While the cake was in the oven, stories were told. News was shared. Children learned patience. Vintage cakes taught families how to wait together. What made these cakes special wasn't perfection, it was consistency. Families could depend on them. When life was uncertain, the cake tasted the same. That reliability became comfort. Years later, people remember not just the cake, but who was in the room when it was served. Recipes were adjusted based on seasons and circumstance. During wartime or economic hardship, butter might be replaced with shortening. Milk might be thin. Eggs were precious, yet the cake still happened. Creativity kept traditions alive. These everyday cakes remind us that memories are built in ordinary moments. Not every memory needs candles or celebrations. Sometimes, it's just a slice of cake and a quiet afternoon. While everyday cakes built comfort, certain vintage cakes were reserved for moments that mattered most. These were the cakes baked for birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, graduations, and holidays, cakes that became part of family legend. Long after the event was forgotten, the cake was still remembered. Layer cakes were the stars of these occasions. Chocolate layer cake with boiled frosting, yellow cake with chocolate icing, or simple white cake with buttercream were made with extra care. Eggs were separated by hand. Pans were greased carefully. Cakes were cooled patiently because cracking a layer felt like a personal failure. These celebration cakes were often made only once or twice a year. That rarity made them special. Children watched closely as the cake was assembled, knowing this wasn't an everyday moment. Licking the spoon felt like a reward. Wedding cakes were simpler than today's towering displays, but they were deeply meaningful. Often homemade, sometimes baked by several women together, they represented unity. A plain white cake with minimal decoration carried more emotion than any modern design. Holiday cakes carried strong sensory memories. Spice cake at Christmas, lemon cake in spring, coconut cake for Easter or summer gatherings. These flavors became tied to seasons and traditions. Even decades later, one bite could bring back an entire holiday. What made these cakes unforgettable was who made them. A grandmother staying up late to finish frosting, an aunt carefully piping borders, a mother adjusting the recipe just a little because she knew what her family liked. These cakes carried fingerprints of love. Mistakes happened, and they became part of the story. A layer that leaned, frosting that melted slightly, yet no one complained. Those imperfections made the cake human and memory richer. Unlike modern celebrations focused on appearance, vintage celebration cakes focused on presence. Everyone gathered around. Slices were served generously. No one rushed. Cake meant togetherness. These recipes survived because they were tied to emotion. People didn't just remember how the cake tasted, they remembered who they were when they ate it. Some of the most beloved vintage cake recipes were born during the hardest times. When families had little money, fewer ingredients, and uncertain futures, cake still found a way into the kitchen. These simple cakes didn't rely on luxury, they relied on ingenuity, patience, and care. Depression-era cakes are a perfect example. Chocolate wacky cake, made without eggs, milk, or butter, was created out of necessity. Yet many families remember it as one of the best cakes they ever tasted. The flavor wasn't rich because of ingredients, it was rich because of meaning. Molasses cake, vinegar cake, and prune cake were common during times when sugar was scarce. These cakes taught families how to stretch what they had. Sweetness came from dried fruits, spices, and slow baking. Children didn't know they were eating substitute desserts. They only knew it was cake, and that was enough. These recipes often came with stories. This is the cake we made during the war. This is what your grandmother baked when your grandfather came home. Food became a timeline. Each cake marked a chapter in family history. What's remarkable is how these cakes didn't disappear when times improved. Families kept baking them not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The taste had become familiar, comforting, safe. Many people today remember these cakes as symbols of resilience. A cake made when there was little hope still brought joy. It reminded families that even in hardship, warmth and care could be created. These simple cakes were often unfrosted or lightly glazed. Presentation didn't matter. What mattered was sharing. Slices were cut evenly. Everyone got a piece. Cake was fairness, kindness, and reassurance. Grandmothers who baked these cakes carried quiet strength. They didn't complain, they adapted, and through baking, they taught lessons without words how to make something good out of very little. These vintage recipes deserve respect, not modernization. They don't need fancy toppings or reinvention. Their power lies in their honesty. Vintage cake recipes survive for one simple reason: they matter. They are more than combinations of flour, sugar, and eggs. They are emotional records of family life. passed down quietly through generations. Long after the people who baked them are gone, these cakes still carry their presence. In today's world of instant desserts and perfectly decorated cakes, vintage recipes remind us to slow down. They teach us that baking wasn't about perfection, it was about intention. Cakes were made with patience, attention, and care. The process mattered just as much as the result. When people recreate these old recipes today, they often discover something surprising. The cake tastes familiar, even if they've never baked it before. That's because these flavors are deeply rooted in shared experience. They represent kitchens that felt safe, voices that felt kind, and moments that felt real. Many families have lost written recipes over time, but the memory of the cake remains. Someone remembers how it smelled. Someone remembers how thick the batter was. Someone remembers who always cut the first slice. These details are just as valuable as instructions. Vintage cakes also remind us of connection. They were rarely eaten alone. They were shared after meals, during conversations, and in moments of togetherness. Cake brought people to the table and kept them there a little longer. Preserving these recipes is about honoring the people who came before us. Grandmothers who baked through hardship, mothers who continued traditions, families who found joy in small moments. Every vintage cake tells a story of care, resilience, and love. As we revisit these 25 vintage cake recipes, we aren't just remembering desserts, we're remembering family. The laughter in the kitchen, the quiet afternoons, the celebrations and the struggles, all preserved in a slice of cake. If these stories brought back memories for you, help keep them alive. Like this video to support heritage food stories, subscribe for more nostalgic recipes and food history, comment below, and share which cake reminds you of your family. Because some recipes aren't written down, but they're never forgotten.